The United States of America is marking a milestone quarter millennium of independence, with celebrations building all the way through July 4th, 2026, which is today, and the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The festivities are being jointly led by the non-partisan U.S. Semi-Quincentennial Commission and a White House task force chaired by President Donald Trump under the banner Freedom 250. Washington, D.C. is at the heart of it. A military parade, fireworks and cultural showcases are planned on the National Mall later today, following last night's star-studded Capitol 4th concert. Boston, Philadelphia, New York and Charleston are also serving as major host cities, with events rolling out nationwide. Amongst the standout moments include the UFC fight staged right on the White House lawn, a great American state fair on the National Mall showcasing traditions from all 56 states and territories, and sail forth a massive gathering of tall ships and naval vessels from around the world, with roughly 32 nations taking part in New York. Beyond the big stage events, there is a strong community push as well. Programs like America Gives are mobilizing volunteers nationwide, with America's Potluck will bring neighbors together for communal meals on 5th of July in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. States have joined in with their own initiatives. Florida has unveiled new statues of the founding fathers and commemorative license plate, while other states are running fitness challenges, parades and historical exhibitions. But we are here to talk about the India-US relations, how they have grown since the independence of India and the diplomatic relations between the two countries that were established, to 2026, where the transformation is such that there is a bilateral trade agreement that is on the anvil, with the two nations at this point of time looking to sign it in the coming months. Let's start off our conversation. On the telecast with me is Ambassador Veena Sikri. Thank you very much for being with us, Ambassador. And of course, about this tremendous amount of energy, enthusiasm, happiness that is displayed in America for its 250th independence celebrations that are taking place. With regards to India's relationship with United States, it has been topsy-turvy ever since India's independence. How do you view the last decades, when India was still a socialist communist nation? We were still a nation that was deprived of food. There was food aid, that we were completely reliant on America. We talk about the 1965 war, the 1971 Bangladesh war, Liberation War, where America continued to side with Pakistan, vis-a-vis the situation today in 2026, where technological advances, emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, critical energies and minerals are the bedrock of India-US relations.
Yes, I think certainly this is a very, very special year. We must congratulate the United States of America on achieving this 250th year of their creation of their independence. And I think that it's something that every country has to be proud of. So we have to congratulate them on the tremendous achievements of the American economy, of America in the field of education, in the field of scientific research, in the way in which they have achieved their number one status in the world, the superpower status in the world. And even after the Cold War, they have been able to consolidate this status. It is a very, very formidable history, a formidable range of successes. We have to grant that to America and congratulate them on all the achievements of the way in which America has represented all these decades the American dream for the whole world. You know, the American dream is something that the whole world has believed in and the whole world has striven for and wanted to be in the USC and be a part of it. And India has been a part of that. You know, India has been very much, we've seen the number of Indian students who've been going there. And we must also say, I must say at this point, that we have to understand and appreciate America's role in India getting its independence in 1947 from the British, where the Americans have always been in favor of the end of the colonial rule, and I think this is something that we have to recognize. But after independence, the India-US relationship has been through somewhat of a roller coaster ride. It's been through its ups and downs. I think the years of India's, forcible growth as a non-aligned country were years of very difficult relationship with the USA, because the USA considered it non-alignment as in the words of one of their own leaders, as an immoral attitude. But India has been wanting to exert its independence and wanting to stay away from power blocks. And this policy of staying away from power blocks has stood India in very good stead. At the same time, America has been ready to help India on the economic side. There was all the PL 480 food aid, which also became controversial in its own way. There was the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug, and the Green Revolution, which helped India to go very far ahead in achieving food self-sufficiency and ensuring its own food security. But the contribution of American scientists in this is to be remembered. Although, on the other hand, you have many people who say that, what about all the pesticides and fertilizers? So there are those two sides of it. But still, we have to recognize that the contribution of the Green Revolution. In the last quarter century, this has been the most important aspect of India-US relations, has been the strong growth in these relations. The India-US nuclear deal and the possibility of India and America cooperating in the field of the civilian uses of nuclear energy is one whose potential has not yet been realized, but it holds the potential still. And even today, I think that now that the sovereign guarantees issue has more or less been resolved, we should hope, even in the field of, these small nuclear reactors, we should have good. But we have, also we had the problems in the second term of President Trump. The first term went very well indeed, but the second term we've had the problems of tariffs, we've had the problems of sanctions, the problems of not being able to buy Russian oil. This has been a very difficult time for India. And I think this is accompanied by a situation within the USA where there's a great deal of polarization within the USA. And I think this is something that the people of USA have been looking at, talking about. And the Indian community in the US, the Indian diaspora in the US, has been tremendously successful, one of the most successful diasporas everywhere. Their achievements, their hard work, their contribution to the American economy has unparalleled. But
absolutely.
Today,
there's a lot to talk about when you talk about people-to-people connect, culture connect, technology, defense, space, trade, of course, being the glue around which the relationship at this point of time stand, and especially that has been the focus. I'm going to also invite Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He's joining me from D.C. Raymond, what's the sentiment like on the ground in America today?
Well, thanks very much for having me. Of course, the sentiment on the ground here is one of celebration. 250 years, the world's oldest democracy, a progenitor of the principles of self-government, that all men are created equal. These are all American bedrock values and achievements, and those are being celebrated. I would say that the celebrations which are taking place locally in towns and villages and cities other than Washington are more prominent than ever today, because we are in a situation here in which there is a split in the American populace in terms of the direction in which we should go. The principles of separation of power, rule of law, the judicial restraint of the executive are all under attack. There is authoritarianism which is being put forward by the present administration, and which seems to be supported in part by the Supreme Court and by the legislature. And so that split has really dampened, if you will, the emphasis that President Trump would like to put on the national celebration downtown, which is going to take place this evening with fantastic fireworks. And so the local celebrations are more important than
And
ever.
how do you view India-US relationship? How has it tided over the decades of our diplomatic relations and strategic ties that have only grown as the years have passed by?
Well, it seems to me that you have to understand and realize and give credit to the drafters of the Indian Constitution, who really looked to the American Constitution, both in terms of separation of powers, federalism, but most important in terms of human rights, the rights of speech, the rights to freedom of assembly, worship, and so forth. Those are all taken directly from the American Bill of Rights. But what happened, of course, after the independence of India was that India embarked upon a license Raj economy, which was self-centered, very protectionist, and did not invite economic interaction. Combine that with really adherence to the Soviet Union line in regard to the Cold War, and you had a situation in which there was estrangement between the United States and India. In the early 1990s, that turned around. I was a part of that, organizing the first business development mission, foreign investment from the United States. And we've had basically an upward trajectory of the relationship since the early 1990s. The U.S.-India civil nuclear deal was perhaps a capstone on that, but there were many other parts of it which happened as India moved away from a top-down license Raj economy and opened itself to the world. Then the principles upon which India and the U.S. are founded of democracy, rule of law, were able to come to the forefront and create a stronger than ever bond.
Right, absolutely, and that bond is reflective. It has been an uphill task for India and America to see eye to eye on a number of issues, and more particularly trade. But here's hoping things settle down as they seem to be doing in the last few months. And of course, like I said, the hinge point at this time, the key focus, what the world is discussing is, of course, the India-US trade deal. Professor Nalapat, if you could also speak to me about, the India of yesteryears and its relationship with America, with presidents like Eisenhower and Nixon to Johnson, and then later on with George W. Bush and Clinton, Biden, and now Donald Trump.
Look, Megha, if you remember, and Raymond Vickery is very much there, the revolution in America against the British Raj, because India and America were both colonized by Britain, that began with the Boston Tea Party, and that tea was Indian. I mean, those who were colonized, the settlers, they threw bales and bales of tea into the ocean, and that tea was Indian. So in a sense, we have an organic relationship. I'd like to agree that, yes, I'm not really very worried about, very honestly, I'm not very worried about the question of, diplomatic relations at the top level or whatever level, because we are a bottom-up relationship with India and the United States. Wherever you go in the United States, you will find Indians. You go to any town, for example, you'll see in the universities, you'll have Indian teachers, Indian students. You go to the healthcare system, you've got Indian physicians. In fact, there's a very powerful American organization, Association of Physicians of Indian Origin, very, very powerful indeed. And that it comprises of Indian physicians in the United States. So wherever you go in the US, there's some parts of the US where you go, in places including New Jersey, New York, Los Angeles, or places like that, and even in places like Atlanta, where you don't think you left India. There's so many Indians around.
Yeah.
When I say Indian, of course, I mean ethnic Indians. And you have all kinds of Indian languages being spoken. You have all kinds of Indian food coming in and being cooked. And people love Indian food there. It's delicious, they say. And you got a huge mushrooming of Indian food restaurants in the United States. It's an organic relationship, Megha. It's not a relationship built by or just by officials or by declarations or by whatever. But I again want to make the point about Indian independence. You have made that point in NewsX very sharply. But may I point out that Indian independence was strongly, very strongly supported by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt angered his good friend Winston Churchill by pointing out to Churchill the hypocrisy of Churchill saying, "We stand by the Atlantic Charter." Atlantic Charter was freedom, liberty for everybody. And then for Roosevelt asked him, "But what about the people of India? Aren't they also people? Does not the charter apply to them?" And of course, Churchill had no answer to that. Essentially, he felt the charter applies only to people of Caucasian descent. But my point is that first, we have a relationship with the United States going back right from the beginning of the United States. And every year, you've got Indians going to the United States, people in America coming here, and you're talking about the food thing. I mean, one has to be grateful about that. I think, yeah, I think Chet Bowles was the ambassador at that point in time. And we had a huge amount of American scientists coming in. And in fact, that launched the germ of the Green Revolution.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, we became self-sufficient. In technology, for example, you have a huge interface now of Indian and American technologies working together, Indian and American IT specialists working together, Indian and American people working together on chip making. And so in the IT revolution, for example, India has been front and center. In the AI revolution also, Indians are front and center. There's no question about it. I mean, I say
Right.
Indians,
Absolutely,
I
sir.
mean, not just Indian citizens, but people of Indian descent in the United States. So there's an organic link between
Absolutely.
India
You
and the
said
United
that. You
States.
said that.
And
I
that
also have
link
with me
is
Dr.
not
Elizabeth
completely
Lawrence, a
broken.
adjunct
It's a
senior
very
fellow
strong
at Pacific Forum. And Dr. Lawrence, how do you view today's America under US President Donald Trump, and particularly his second term as president, the country that stands for liberty, equality, and democracy, which is the most powerful country in the entire world, which is a country that has materialized the dreams of thousands and millions of people all across the globe. It is also called the country of immigrants.
Well, first of all, I do want to thank Prime Minister Modi and the nation of India for congratulating us on our 250th birthday. I think it's very kind to think of us. India is the world's largest democracy. The United States is the world's oldest modern democracy, still functioning under its original constitution. So I think we're brethren, that we share democratic values. The United States, evidently, obviously, you can see is still going strong. The economy continues to beat all odds, even despite, an Iran war where, oil prices went up and was quite a hardship for Americans. We see those oil prices have come down tremendously. And so that's been helpful. Inflation is still higher than Americans would like it to be. We have a new Fed chairman. We will see in which direction that goes. So the economy overall is strong. Certainly, there are more millionaires in America than ever before. That's mostly because the older generations, the values of their houses have increased, and then they have significant investments in equity, right? This is something that Karl Marx never envisioned. This is something that the socialists did not envision, that capitalism, that the middle class, the average man, would become a capitalist. and own the means of production. You have 18-year-olds, you have high schoolers buying equities. So the economy continues to go pretty strong. Democracy is safe. We see a lot of criticism of President Trump's overreach. Recently, the Supreme Court came out with a lot of decisions that went against him. Some of them certainly, what supported him. But perhaps the most significant was the reading of the 14th Amendment about birthright citizenship. That is huge. So I think, right now there's like some 3 million Indian immigrants living in the United States. If you count their descendants, and their children born here, you've got like 5 million Indians here. I think they could be very confident in U.S. Democracy and the U.S. economy. Socially, we have our divisions, and that is being fought out in the public space, in the public sphere, and it needs to be done more peacefully than it has been done recently.
Absolutely. I am also being joined by Pramit Palchaudhary. He's an analyst, Eurasia Group. Pramit, I do want to ask you a question about the current state of affairs, whether they are diplomatic ties or people-to-people relations or strategic ties that India and United States of America have. Of course, when the trade deal is hanging in the balance, we are talking about getting market access edge, securing tariff advantages. Will this be the defining factor of the relationship between the two countries in 2026, or the time period, the 4 years that US President Donald Trump is president of the country?
Well, for Trump, the trade deal has been overridingly important. I think for India is the assumption that America has taken a slightly different view on India, and one that will probably continue even after Trump, whether the Democrats or the Republicans take over. At the heart of this is that we had a 20-year period going back to the George W. Bush administration where America committed itself publicly to the rise of India, that it was in America's interest to create a more powerful India. And this was laid down by Philip Zelikow, who was at that point Condoleezza Rice's advisor at a press conference. Now we've seen the American system, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Carl Landau, for example, saying that at the Rice-Synod dialogue, that is no longer America's view. Yes, we will have a perfectly friendly relationship with India, but America will no longer go out of its way to create a more powerful India. That's really up to India to decide, but America will be more transactional. That's fine. That is what that is broadly where the rest of the world is going as well. So that's not a total surprise. And there are problems that the United States faces domestically. So that 20-year period is coming to a close, I would argue. And the point is that it does not matter whether it's Trump or, for example, the progressive Democrats who may come to power after or at a later point. They have a very similar point of view. America must rebuild its manufacturing. America must withdraw from sustaining or underwriting the international system. So we now have to rework our relationship with America. It's not a hostile relationship, but it's no longer underpinned by this, should we say, more generous strategic vision. But keep in mind, America is overwhelmingly India's #1 economic partner. It is by far our largest source of FDI, our largest source of FII. It is by far our largest source of remittances now. And even the countries that we are close to, the middle powers that we are engaging with, other than Russia, all of them are American allies. They're treaty allies of the United States, Canada and Japan, Israel, UAE. Some of them may have some doubts about America. Fundamentally, they're part of the American strategic sphere. So we have the basis for a new relationship. The trade deal, I think, will come through, if only because we packaged it with a bunch of other deals, energy deals, investment, $20 billion worth of investment by Indian companies into the United States, and some goodies, I think, for the Trump family. So you put that together, that's enough to get that trade deal through. and which is why you're now talking about the Quad Summit and everything else coming back into play. But it's a very clearly different relationship, and it's going to take a while for both sides to figure out where exactly the basis for that relationship is.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pramit, for giving us that insight. And I thank all my other panelists as well for joining me for this very special telecast and wishing America a very happy birthday on its 250th Independence Day celebrations. All right, shifting focus to the other news coming in. As discussed right now, India and US have surprising connections that date back to American Revolution, from the Boston Tea Party and the East India Company to Hyder Ali, Tipu Sultan and Lord Cornwallis. These forgotten stories reveal how events in India shaped a turning point in American history. Let's take a look.
Every year on July 4th, the United States celebrates Independence Day, marking the adoption of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. It's remembered as the birth of a nation built on the ideals of liberty and self-rule. But the story of America's independence wasn't confined to the 13 colonies. Thousands of kilometers away, events unfolding in India shaped the fortunes of the British Empire, while India's resources and history became unexpectedly intertwined with the American Revolution. From the tea that ignited a rebellion to the rulers of Mysore who stretched British military power, here are 5 fascinating and often overlooked links between India's history and America's fight for independence. One of the defining moments of the American Revolution was the Boston Tea Party in 1773, when colonists dumped East India Company tea into Boston Harbor in protest against British taxation. While much of the tea traded by the company at the time came from China, the East India Company was the same colonial enterprise that exercised political and commercial control over large parts of India. Its growing influence in India financed and sustained Britain's imperial ambitions. So the company, whose tea became the symbol of resistance in America, was also deeply tied to Britain's expansion in India, creating an unexpected historical connection between the two struggles. One of history's lesser-known anecdotes involves George Washington. After Britain's defeat in America, some later historical accounts suggest that Washington's name was informally discussed in Britain as a possible successor to Charles Cornwallis for a senior position in India because of his military reputation. There is no evidence that a formal offer was ever made or accepted, and Washington never came to India. While historians continue to debate the story's authenticity, it highlights the extraordinary global stature Washington had earned after leading the American colonies to independence. While American revolutionaries fought British forces across the Atlantic, Hyder Ali and later Tipu Sultan were battling the British East India Company in southern India during the Anglo-Mysore Wars. These simultaneous conflicts forced Britain to divide its troops, ships, and finances across multiple fronts. Historians have long argued that Britain's global military commitments weakened its ability to concentrate resources in North America. In that sense, Mysore's resistance indirectly contributed to the pressures that eventually culminated in Britain's defeat during the American War of Independence. France was America's most important ally during the Revolutionary War, but its rivalry with Britain had already played out for decades in India. The Carnatic Wars and the wider Anglo-French struggle for influence on the subcontinent gave France valuable military and naval experience while intensifying its determination to challenge British power globally. When France entered the American Revolutionary War in 1778, it transformed what had begun as a colonial rebellion into a global conflict. Britain's need to defend its interests in India, the Caribbean, and Europe stretched its resources even further. British General Charles Cornwallis, remembered for surrendering to George Washington at Yorktown in 1781, later became the Governor General of India. Instead of ending his career after America's independence, Cornwallis went on to reshape British administration in India through sweeping judicial, revenue, and civil service reforms. His journey from losing Britain's American colonies to strengthening British rule in India reflects how closely the two imperial histories were connected, separated by oceans but united by history. India and America share surprising links dating back to the Revolutionary War. From tea and trade to battles and empires, these forgotten connections reveal that America's independence was shaped by events far beyond its own shores.